The United States summoned this mob and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing, she said. Significantly, party leaders are not telling members which way to vote. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting that the leading Republican in the Senate, the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, has told associates that he believes Mr. Trump did commit impeachable offences.
YouTube has become the latest social media platform to frustrate President Trump's ability to speak directly to his supporters. Late on Tuesday, YouTube removed new content uploaded to his channel, saying it violated policies on inciting violence. No new videos or live streams can now be uploaded for at least 7 days. A patent lodged by the Chinese technology company Huawei has been found to describe a system that could pick out members of the mainly Muslim Uyghur ethnic minority from other pedestrians. Leo Kellyan reports.
Huawei has previously claimed none of its technologies are designed to identify ethnic groups, but this patent suggests it is at least something it has considered. The mostly Muslim Uyghurs face persecution in China. Human rights activists have accused the authorities there of using high-tech surveillance against them. The patent application refers to a system designed to analyse pedestrians' movements, which it says could be targeted at people according to whether they are a Uyghur, among other attributes. Huawei says it opposes the use of technology to carry out ethnic discrimination and now plans to amend the filing.
The trial of more than 350 Mafia suspects is due to begin in Calabria in southern Italy. Mark Lowen has the details.
Coordinated raids in Italy, Germany, Switzerland and Bulgaria more than a year ago led to the biggest ever strike against the 'Ndrangheta, the mafia based in the southern Italian region of Calabria, which has become Italy's most powerful organised crime group. More than 300 suspects face charges including murder, drug trafficking and money laundering in the largest anti-mafia trial since the 1980s. It focuses on one clan in the family-run 'Ndrangheta, which dominates Europe's cocaine trade and is estimated to boast at least 20,000 members worldwide.
World News from the BBC. The convicted murderer Lisa Montgomery has been executed in prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, becoming the first woman to be put to death by the US federal justice system since 1953. The 52-year-old was killed by lethal injection early on Wednesday morning. She had been convicted in 2007 of kidnapping and strangling Bobby Jo Stinnett, then 8 months pregnant, and cutting Stinnett's baby from the womb. Federal executions, paused for 17 years, resumed under President Trump. The number of people dying from COVID-19 in the United States has reached a new daily record. 470 people died in the 24 hours to Tuesday evening. More than 235,000 new cases of coronavirus were also recorded. Syrian state media says Israel has carried out airstrikes in eastern Syria near the border with Iraq. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the raids targeted arms depot and military positions. It said at least 5 Syrian soldiers and 11 allied fighters were killed. The sister of North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has described the South Korean Defense Ministry as a truly weird group that are hard to understand. Kim Yo-jong suggested it had nothing better to do after showing interest in a military parade to mark the North's ruling party Congress. Laura Bicker is in Seoul.
It comes at the end of what has been a rare party congress, the first held in 5 years. But Kim Yo-jong's comments come also at a time when the South Korean president said just yesterday that he would meet with the North any place and any time. Now, she's actually criticising South Korea's military, who have been watching Pyongyang very closely during this party congress because it's thought there was going to be a military parade. And of course, there's a keen interest in what kind of military hardware they were prepared to show off.
BBC News.
Thank you for that. Welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Lawrence and James. We'll start in the US in a moment. We'll also head to Bosnia, Ireland and Indonesia in the next half hour. Sport and business headlines also on the way. And if you want to get in touch on any of the stories we bring you, go to BBC World Service on Facebook and Twitter. You can also send us a text or a WhatsApp message. Our number is +44 or 044, depending on your country code, and then 77 86 20 50 85.
Now, let's talk about American politics. Why don't we? Just for a change. One of the most senior Republican figures in Congress, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, has said that she is now going to vote to impeach President Trump for inciting last week's deadly attack on the Capitol building. She is very, very senior, of course, an incredibly senior figure, as I say, number 3 in the House. By the way, we should say the US Vice President Mike Pence has made it clear that he is not going to support the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. So we are looking at impeachment, and it now looks like that's going to move on Wednesday and will take place. Now, President Trump himself has been dismissing once again as ridiculous the efforts by Democrats to impeach him. He's been down in Texas inspecting his wall at Alamo, not the Alamo we learned earlier in the programme, but Alamo. He also says that he's done absolutely nothing wrong in terms of the language that he used, and he did not, therefore, incite a riot. But what is happening with the Republicans and their relations with their president? I've been speaking to the Washington Post and their national political correspondent, Philip Bump. The Washington Post has done an extensive investigation into what exactly President Trump was doing while the riot was taking place. But first, those relations with Republicans.
The rumors are that there could be a dozen, perhaps even 24 Republicans in the House who decide to support the second impeachment of President Trump. It's particularly remarkable because there are some prominent Republicans in the mix there. For example, the number 3 ranking Republican in the House, Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming, the daughter of the former vice president, has expressed in very stark terms her support for impeachment, really condemning President Trump's behavior last week, and frankly for several months before that. The ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee has similarly come out and said that he supports impeachment. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has expressed, at least through other people to the press, that he is supportive of the impeachment as well.
One of the names that you mentioned, Liz Cheney, described it as a matter of conscience, a vote of conscience. How much is it a vote of conscience and how much is it a vote of self-interest? I'm asking partly because I've been reading the Post's account of Republican politicians locked down in the Capitol with the mob besieging them outside. They're calling the president. You have remarkable testimony of people who are sort of calling people who are standing next to President Trump, and he just doesn't answer. Has something broken between that relationship? I mean, is this self-preservation electorally, or did they learn something during the lockdown about the relationship with Trump?
I think that there certainly was a shift that was felt not only among elected Republicans, but I think broadly last week. I think that, Mike Pence, the vice president, has been a very loyal foot soldier for President Trump, but he's also someone that comes from Congress, and he is someone that has strong institutional relationships there. That he was treated in the way that he was treated, I think, resonates. The Republicans are in a tough spot. They have been loyal to Trump for years because they've been worried about his base. But then they have this external pressure that one Republican House member alluded to, that they're actually concerned about some members of Donald Trump's base from a personal safety standpoint.
The Post's report is built up from many conversations that Republican lawmakers were having with people in the White House. What ultimately is the picture that emerges of what Donald Trump was doing while the mob was storming the Capitol?
Donald Trump was watching television. There are multiple reports from multiple outlets suggesting that he was very much enjoying what he was seeing. He was seeing a crowd of people who were taking it into their own hands to try and defend his honor. Eventually, he was convinced that he should make some statement. The statements he made while the threat was ongoing were tepid. It was only after the Capitol had been secured that he released a long video statement, which got more to the sorts of things that one might have expected a president to say. But we've been hearing reports he wasn't happy with that video message in which he actually criticized the mob, because that wasn't really how he felt pretty clearly.
And he would have been aware of the predicament of members of his party who felt, some of them in considerable physical danger, not very far from him in Washington.
At the very least, he should have been, right? I mean, it's important to remember that President Trump has, for most of his presidency, gotten most of his salient information for doing his job from watching Fox News and other news channels, not necessarily from the experts who were surrounding him. And so while what was airing on television was a far more sanitized version of what was happening on the ground, we're learning over the course of the past week exactly how terrifying and potentially deadly and dangerous the events were. We didn't know that in real time necessarily, and so he may not have known that, especially if he wasn't actually talking to the vice president.
Because he just wasn't taking the calls. Who were they calling? They were calling people who were next to him in the Oval Office, people who were there in the White House?
People were calling everyone they could possibly call. Nancy Pelosi was calling the governor of Virginia. I mean, people were calling Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. I believe actually Jared Kushner may have been traveling. They were calling Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president. They were calling anyone they could get in touch with, his chief of staff, trying to get a hold of him, express how dire the situation was. And the indication is that for an extended period of time, that message was not getting to President Trump.
He just carried on watching it on television.
Right.
Philip Bump, the national political correspondent of the Washington Post, reflecting in part on their investigation into what was happening at the White House in the hours of the riot around the Capitol, but also what the impact on that has been for the president's relations with senior Republican figures.
News Day on the BBC World Service. Let's go to a story breaking that the convicted murderer, Lisa Montgomery, has been executed in prison in Indiana, becoming the first woman to be put to death by the US federal justice system since 1953. The 52-year-old was killed by lethal injection early on Wednesday morning. Ashley Kincaid-Eve is an anti-death penalty activist and attorney in Indianapolis. She was outside the facility where Lisa was executed and joins us live now. There had been a last-minute stay of execution. What happened after that?
So it's something that I have come to call the dance with death, which has become pretty typical of the death penalty system in America. And it's these last minute stays between our Supreme Courts and our federal system and the courts where it's a will they or won't they execute the individual. And we have found with many of these executions, they're often happening in the middle of the night, where our Supreme Court decides in a very partisan decision to allow the killings to happen in the middle of the night. And that's unfortunately what happened here. There was a stay that was lifted shortly after midnight by our Supreme Court, and shortly thereafter our prison rushes to kill as quickly as they're able to, and they carried out the execution of Lisa Montgomery.
The fundamental argument made on her behalf was that she didn't have the mental capacity. Is that right?
That is correct, that she lacked the mental competency to understand why she was being executed. She is a victim of profound trauma. She was sex trafficked by her own parents, raped repeatedly by her own stepfather as a child, a victim of domestic violence, just her entire life very, very traumatized, where there has been ample evidence that there's been a break with reality. She has been housed in a mental hospital in our federal prison system, where she had to be driven from a mental hospital in Texas up to Indiana to be killed, which is about a 15-hour drive. And so the government themselves are aware that she has these issues, and yet the Trump administration has shown that they have a thirst to kill and to kill as many people as possible. And for whatever reason, they chose the only woman on death row in one of their, what I am calling the unlucky 13, to be chosen by the Trump administration for death.
When you say, for whatever reason, is it your sense that this was sending a deliberate signal in the last few days of the Trump administration to push forward with these federal executions?
You know, what's surprising is prior to becoming the first world leader banned on Twitter, the president has been very vocal about many, many things on Twitter throughout his presidency, but I have not seen one tweet from him regarding these executions, which was very surprising. But I do think it is part of just his overall domineering to want to be the best, to be the most killing president, the most law and order. He's been very vocal about his support of the death penalty. So I think it's just his way to show again, even in the middle of a pandemic, rather than valuing life, our president would rather be remembered for death. And I think what happened in the United States at our Capitol and the deadly attack on our Capitol, I think, is very symbolic, along with this, of the legacy that the Trump president is going to leave behind. Prior to these executions, the most the United States has ever executed in an entire decade was 9 individuals, and President Trump will, by the end of the week, have executed 13 people in 6 months, and that's just unprecedented.
Ashley Kincaid-Eve, anti-death penalty activist and attorney in Indianapolis, joining us live there.
That is one of the top stories. Also coming up, we're going to be talking about this in about 20 minutes' time. Italy's biggest mafia trial in 3 decades is due to begin in the southern region of Calabria, and it's emerged that the Chinese tech company Huawei has patented a system that can pick out members of the Uyghur ethnic minority from other pedestrians. Sport, James Gregg.
3 points clear in a big game at the weekend. Manchester United are top of the Premier League table for the first time in unbelievably more than 3 years. They beat Burnley 1-0 away from home last night. They play Liverpool at Anfield at the weekend, so all eyes on Anfield. At the other end of the table last night, Sheffield United got their first win of the season. At the 18th attempt, they beat Newcastle 1-0 at Bramall Lane. Elsewhere, Everton, they're up to 4th now after beating Wolves 2-1. In La Liga, Atletico Madrid, they're the pace setters. They're 4 points clear. They've still got 2 games in hand over both Real Madrid and Barcelona, with a 2-0 victory over Sevilla last night. Elsewhere, World Cup winning US midfielder Megan Rapinoe has said that the murderous mob of President Donald Trump's supporters who stormed the Capitol last week showed the country's true colours. And Egypt is busy preparing for the Men's World Handball Championships, which gets underway a little later on. 32 national sides will be taking part. And more sport from me in 30 minutes' time here on Newsday.
James Gregg, thank you.
Business News now, and Andrew Wood is at our business desk in Hong Kong, and we're going to be talking about Boeing, Andrew, because they've announced what are probably the last orders for its 747 airliner. It's been flying a while.
Yeah, the first flight was in 1969. Since then, Boeing has built and sold more than 1,000 of the airliners. Production of the passenger version has already ended, and also a lot of aircraft in the COVID pandemic have withdrawn. A lot of airlines have withdrawn 747s. This order is for 4 freighters, the air freight version of the Boeing 747, and Boeing says that once they're completed in 2022, the production will finally cease.
Right, so they have got a few more orders, but they're not doing very well at the moment, Boeing.
No, Boeing is falling behind on orders and deliveries, certainly compared to its main rival, Airbus. It's had problems, of course, with the 737 MAX. It's got problems with cash problems because of that, because it hasn't been able to deliver 737 MAXes. It's not getting any cash for them. It's had problems with its 787 Dreamliner. They've had quality problems there, so production has ceased. And all in all, Boeing at the moment has orders for 4,223 aircraft. Airbus, though, its main rival, 7,184.
Andrew Wood, thank you very much indeed.
This is Newsday, coming up to 20 past the hour. We've been talking on this programme about the snow in Spain. Spectacular, cold, miserable for many. But the snow in Bosnia-Herzegovina is another thing entirely. We're talking about the plight and the situation of hundreds of people, refugees and asylum seekers, who are stuck, basically, in a humanitarian crisis. That's what international aid groups are saying. They want emergency support provided for the people. Let's speak now to Samir Mukic, who's managing editor of BIRN, which is the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network in Bosnia and Herzegovina. First off, Samir, thanks for joining us on the programme. Can you just give us a quick sketch of what the situation is like for these people? Are they at a border? Are they in pre-existing camps already?
Hello. Most of them, a couple of thousand that are in Bosnia, are in camps, but there are a couple of hundred of people that are literally living in the woods or in the streets without any shelter, without any accommodation, or they are being provided adequate food. Their situation is really dire, and this is true humanitarian crisis. They are not exactly at the border, but they are really, really close to Croatian border.
How come that they are not in the camps? Have they just recently arrived, or they've been ejected from the camps? How come they're in the situation that they are?
It's because Bosnia actually never managed to solve the problem and to build proper camps through all these years that is facing actually this crisis. And the camp that most of these people were was built in April 2020, but it was only temporarily camp, and it had to be closed when the winter started. Since Bosnia has really cold, snowy winters, and the international institutions actually were afraid that it will not be a good during the winter, so they had to close it. And while it was closing, the fire was lit up and the whole camp actually was just destroyed. So there's no alternative. There is one camp in Bihać city, but local authorities and people actually protested that. They didn't allow them to come back to the city. So now they are literally in the woods waiting for a resolution.
My goodness.
There are
Okay,
some,
so nobody wants them. Is there a sense that the appalling conditions play into a political desire to discourage people from coming through Bosnia and Herzegovina? That people, the government or whoever, don't want a permanent structure because otherwise they fear it'll just become permanent and attract more people.
Yes, that's one of the reasons, actually, but there are also others. The others are complex situation and political structure and relationships inside the country, since one of the entities which has half of the territory is not willing to accept any of them. People are also furious with the EU and the lack to allow these people to come into the EU, but also not reacting good enough to illegal pushbacks from Croatia. So people in these areas actually feel that they have on their shoulders all of the problems of these people, and they don't have enough resources.
You raise an interesting issue there. Presumably, international law says that Croatia should accept anyone who presents themselves at the border, and the EU indeed has an obligation to do that. But you're saying these people are being illegally pushed back, and therefore they become Bosnia's problem.
Yes, the European Commissioner for Human Rights a few days ago issued a paper which is actually claiming this. The international humanitarian organization and activists are saying this for years. There are even proofs and videos of Croatian police doing illegal pushbacks, but the EU and Croatia itself, Croatian authorities are not responding to that. That's why people in this region, northwest Bosnia, are quite furious with everything that is happening. They're also not happy with the way that EU is actually treating the matter, not insisting enough on the other entity to accept migrants and refugees, and they really have a bad feeling, and their temper towards refugees actually changed in the last year. They were really welcoming for all these years, but that really changed.
So it's obviously getting worse. Samir, many thanks indeed. Samir Mutkic of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network.
Indonesia's President Joko Widodo has received his country's first COVID vaccine. The country has registered 24,000 COVID-related deaths in a population of 270 million. And as we told you in the programme, it's taking a different approach to vaccination to others. Once frontline health workers get the jab, instead of vaccinating elderly people in their first phase, they're targeting younger working people. The BBC's Asia editor, Rebecca Henschke, reports.
The Indonesian capital, Jakarta's traffic is amongst the worst in the world. So the best way to get around or get things delivered is by motorbike taxis, known as ojeks. They're a key part of the city, and the drivers who have been working throughout the pandemic will be amongst the first group to get immunised against COVID-19 as part of Indonesia's Youth First strategy. We're focusing on vaccinating those that have to meet lots of people as part of their work, once frontline health workers have got the jab, says Health Minister Budi Gunadi Sadikin. People like motorbike taxis and police. We're targeting working people who are likely to get it and spread it, he says. Professor Amin Subantrio, the health expert who recommended this vaccination strategy to the government, believes this approach will give the country the best chance of achieving herd immunity, the indirect protection from an infectious disease that happens when a population is immune, either through vaccination or previous infection.
menjadi di bawah 1.
That's the long-term objective, he says, or we at least reduce significantly the spread of the virus so the pandemic gets under control and we get the economy going again. The other reason is that the Chinese-manufactured vaccine that Indonesia is using has only been tested in the country on the 18 to 59 age group.
Makanya kita menunggulah kajian.
We're waiting on more data from other countries that took part in the trial before including the elderly in round 2, says COVID vaccination spokesperson for the Health Ministry, Dr. Siti Nadia.
Maka dia kan tidak akan membawa penyakit itu ke rumah.
But she says they believe that by immunising the working members of a household, those most likely to get the virus, will also protect the elderly relatives they live with. Most Indonesians live in intergenerational households, so isolating the elderly is very difficult. But Professor Robert Reid, a member of a committee that advises the UK government on immunisation, says more research needs to be done on that.
Of course, they may be right. We haven't been able to demonstrate yet that the vaccines have any impact at all on transmission. In other words, if you vaccinate a younger person, you may well prevent them getting disease, but you may not necessarily prevent them from becoming infected and carrying the virus and moving it on to people. We simply don't have that information yet. So they're going to have very high coverage rates in order to prevent transmission into their vulnerable population.
But he adds that it's not for us in rich Western nations to tell other countries around the world what they should be doing. And the Indonesian strategy may be just the right thing for their country, argues Professor Dale Fisher from the National University Hospital in Singapore.
I don't have a big problem with Indonesia's pragmatic approach to say we're just going to vaccinate this age group. They're the group that we've got data on. This is an accessible group that will certainly allow perhaps ongoing business, the food pipeline, all these types of things which are critical and are generally done by the under 60s.
It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? I think the world will be watching to see how they get on. That was Rebecca Henschke reporting there on the case of Indonesia and the vaccine. You're listening to Newsday from the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, concluding our series of US presidential profiles.
Is very proud of his blue-collar background.
Being a man of the people, I rode with the press, and you can't get much lower than riding with the press.
Joe Biden is president-elect of the United States.
The first time I met him, once we were actually competing, he was always so pleasant to everybody.
He's often seen as the common man with a tragic history.
To lose his wife and his daughter, he almost stopped then.
Join me, James Naughtie, as we look to the challenges that lie ahead.
The Biden administration is going to have to start at 60 miles an hour. This is a moment of awesome, I think, humbling complexity for any president.
Presidential profiles. President-elect Joe Biden. Tuesday at 9:20 GMT.
Hello, welcome to Newsday with Lawrence Pollard and James Cotnell.
Right, in this half hour, senior Tigrayan officials have been taken to Addis Ababa and apprehended. Does it mean the government's restoring control over Tigray?
Also, Italy's largest Mafia trial in more than 30 years, set to begin. Hundreds of defendants, more than 900 witnesses.
And in the latest of our State of the Oceans series, we go whale watching off the coast of California.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. A number of senior figures in the US Republican Party have said they will support a second impeachment of President Trump a week before his term ends. Democrats are likely to push for a vote later on Wednesday in the House of Representatives. The move became almost certain after the Vice President Mike Pence said he was not prepared to use his powers to replace Mr. Trump using the 25th Amendment. The United States Justice Department and the FBI have opened criminal investigations into more than 160 individuals for their part in last week's attack on the Capitol building in Washington. The charges are likely to include assault and seditious conspiracy. US military commanders have issued a statement condemning the Capitol riots and confirming that President-elect Joe Biden would become the 46th Commander-in-Chief. The convicted murderer Lisa Montgomery has been executed in a prison in Indiana, becoming the first woman to be put to death by the US federal justice system since 1953. She'd been convicted of kidnapping and strangling Bobby Jo Stinnett, then 8 months pregnant, and cutting Stinnett's baby from the womb. The child survived. A patent lodged by the Chinese technology company Huawei has been found to describe a system that could pick out members of the Uyghur ethnic minority from other pedestrians. The discovery by a US research group is the latest indication of how China is using advanced surveillance technology in its campaign against the mainly Muslim Uyghur population. And the trial of more than 350 Mafia suspects is due to begin in Calabria in southern Italy. It's the largest anti-Mafia trial in the country in 30 years. The suspects are members of the family-run 'Ndrangheta organised crime group. BBC News.
Thank you, Lawrence and James, with Newsday on the BBC World Service. That huge Mafia trial is about to start, and we're going to be talking about that. A former call centre was converted to handle it because no existing courtroom is big enough for all the accused and the witnesses. Also, James is about to talk about latest developments in Ethiopia. Sports news with James Gregg as well. And we talk social media once again. Surprise, surprise. Hard to avoid it. The American president banned by Twitter and Facebook. Twitter and Facebook banned by the Ugandan president. What's going on between social media and politics? We try to get at the bottom of that. That's Tuesday.
We will give you an update from Ethiopia to start with. Captured senior leaders from the country's northern Tigray region have been taken to Addis Ababa. Another sign the federal government says that its military operation is succeeding. But who are these TPLF officials? And is the central government on course to carry out its mission of subduing the troubled region? A question for Bronwyn Bruton from the Atlantic Council in Washington.
There have been a number of arrests over the past several weeks since the TPLF was driven from its headquarters in Mekelle, the regional capital of Tigray. And the most significant arrest has been of Sabat Nega, who was essentially the founder of the TPLF, an extremely senior person in the party, a person who was really considered the intellectual center of the movement. And so his arrest several days ago, which came after he was turned in by informants among the Tigrayan population, has been regarded by some as a kind of watershed moment in the campaign against what many feared would be a long insurgency.
Is it your take then that it won't be a long insurgency?
I think it's very unlikely that it will be, to be honest with you, for a number of reasons. In the first place, the TPLF leadership is elderly at this stage. And it's kind of hard to imagine a group of people who are in their 60s or 70s, or in Sabat Nega's case, in their mid-80s. I think he's 86 years old, going into the bush or the mountains and leading the kind of insurgency that they successfully led in the early 1990s. It's also the case that the TPLF is very isolated politically, not only inside of Ethiopia, where they're deeply unpopular, but internationally at this stage. They have no regional allies who are willing to supply them with arms. Additionally, one of the major concerns of the international community was their sense that the TPLF was popular in Tigray and that they would be able to draw on a deep well of support within the local population and to have the kind of guerrilla campaign that al-Shabaab has been able to wage in Somalia, where they were effectively hiding in plain sight, sheltered by the local population, not turned into the authorities because they were pursuing a popular goal.
But how can we be sure of that, given the difficulties of getting accurate information, given the constraints on reporting in Tigray?
Indeed, you certainly would never want to assume that there's a monolithic opinion about this. But I think the fact that the government has been so successful in getting information from the population is demonstrated by the number of arrests that they've been able to make. It's certainly not to downplay the difficulties that are remaining in terms of organizing free and fair elections in Tigray, delivering economic benefits to the Tigrayan people to make them feel incorporated in Ethiopia, reassuring them of their safety, re-embracing them, so to speak, so that they are part of the Ethiopian project. These are all significant challenges, yet need to be accompanied by the delivery of a peace dividend in the form of economic benefits. And no one is, it's certainly not the Ethiopian government, I think, is harboring any delusions about that being easy. But at the same time, I think that what the arrest of Sabatnega and the other TPLF leaders is showing is that the population is apparently willing to work with the government to turn the page on this period. And that is a hopeful sign.
That's Bronwyn Bruton from the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C.
The largest Mafia trial that Italy has held for decades is due to start in Calabria, in the south of the country today. The Mafia, of course, is several groups, not necessarily related, and this one we're talking about is the one that at the moment appears to be most powerful, the 'Ndrangheta, as they're called. The trial's expected to last for 2 years. Among those being accused are politicians, civil servants, police and business. Let's talk now to Dr. Anna Sergi, who's a senior lecturer in criminology from the University of Essex in the UK and is originally herself from Calabria as well. Anna, welcome to the programme. Can we just first off just talk about the occasion, the theatre, if you like, because it seems extraordinary. Tell us a little bit about where it's taking place and how it's going to be conducted.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, so this trial is gonna start. That's gonna start today. It's already started actually over almost 1 year and some months ago. We are seeing 352 people standing trial out of the 410 that were originally charged. There is a specific strategy behind having such a massive trial, one of which is to attract attention to what is actually going on.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it in a bad way, obviously.
No, but because it can seem almost a little bit clumsy, and kind of one of the complaints about Italian law that you always hear is that the law moves incredibly slowly. The 'Ndrangheta, of course, moves fast. In a sense, is this a trial about the 'Ndrangheta now, or is this actually about the past 10 years?
It is not what it seems to be. I mean, this trial is about one province, not the whole of Calabria, and it's not even the province where most of the main clans of the 'Ndrangheta are. This is about one clan, which is peculiarly the clan that is mostly well known around Europe, the Mancuso clan, and they are essentially drug traffickers, and they do quite a lot of money laundering around the world. So it is an important trial, but by all means, this is not the trial of the century. I mean,
that's extraordinary. Are you sort of implying that there could be several trials equally big and we still wouldn't get to the bottom of the 'Ndrangheta?
Yes, that is pretty much what has been happening. I mean, obviously, international media is picking up different things, but we have had several trials of this type in the past 10 years, not as big as this one, so not 300 and something, but there was another trial about 8 years ago of 330 defendants, all convicted, which was more important than this one in terms of redefining what the mafia is in Calabria. So trials of this size in Italy are not the norm, but they are common enough for us to...
And do they achieve anything, really, other than making a great deal of media attention and giving the impression that something is being done?
They do achieve something in the sense that there is, Calabria is now not what it used to be 15 years ago before this type of trial started in the region. So there is quite a lot of shaking up on the grounds. But the problem is that the 'Ndrangheta grip on the territory goes way beyond what the state can do. For a simple reason, we are reacting to a problem. We are not proactively trying to fix it.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, there are social issues and underlying problems with mafia power in Italy, not just in Italy, everywhere in the world. And these are problems related to all sorts of things, like employment, like education, like political and economic will and opportunities. So for this specific trial, the guy who is now facing charges, he is the boss of the province, but he has been in prison for 20 years and ruling from prison. So even if he does go back in prison, chances are he will do exactly what he has been doing for the past decades.
Wow.
So,
Anna, listen, many, many thanks indeed. Vivid picture. Anna Sergi, Senior Lecturer in Criminology from the University of Essex here in the UK, reflecting on the Maxi trial, which is due to open officially in its kind of, I suppose, its theatrical form in Calabria today.
Concerns have been raised here in the UK that young black men and boys aren't being given fair trials because of the use of rap and drill music in their prosecutions. The BBC has identified over 60 trials across the UK where people's appearances in music videos and the lyrics they've performed have been used to help convict them. Police and the Crown Prosecution Service say they aren't suppressing freedom of expression. Our reporter Chichi Izundu can tell us more. Hi, firstly, for those who don't know, what is drill music?
Well, good morning to you. So drill is actually a form of rap music. It's thought to have originated from Chicago, the south side of Chicago in the United States of America, about 10 years ago. It's often described as dark, defined by its beat, and often has violent lyrics. But the drill we're talking about is the one that stems from the streets of London in the United Kingdom, which has taken influence from the Chicago drill, but it's developed its own tone and its own sound and its own following.
Yeah, and it might seem surprising then to hear about it in the context of courts and prosecutions.
Indeed, well, academics alongside the BBC looked into a number of court cases across the United Kingdom. And as you said, we found at least 67 trials that had featured drill or rap. Now, the videos or lyrics to their songs are often used by the prosecution as evidence to claim that the defendant is a gang member and or shows the intent for real life violence. Now, almost half of the defendants, the 232 defendants, were teenagers, and most were black boys or young black men. Now, Roscoe Onya was imprisoned for years for possession of a gun. He's a rapper, and during his trial, he had a lyric he'd posted in a music video online used against him. Prosecutors said it proved he wanted to go out and shoot a rival gang member, but Roscoe says that's not true. He says he understands that the police have to keep the public safe, but doesn't think his rap should have been used against him.
Using my video in court, for me, I didn't really deem it necessary, because that was just me trying to get myself out of the situation I was in. That was me now seeing a better future for myself and trying to do music.
Now, academics from the University of Manchester and the London School of Economics have raised concerns about the racial bias around rap and drill music, and also that the popular art form is being misunderstood and even criminalised. Assistant Professor Abena Owusu-Bempah from the London School of Economics says we should be seriously concerned about what's happening in British courtrooms.
This indicates a targeting of rap music, because we're not seeing this with other genres of music and art forms, rap being a form of black expressive culture. Prosecutors are using drill music to help construct case theories by relying on stereotypical imagery about young black men and boys as criminals, and using the music to amplify pre-existing stereotypes. We should be seriously concerned about what's happening in our courtrooms, because they will attach far more weight to the evidence than it deserves, thinking that, yes, this is a realistic depiction of this person's actual experiences and intentions, when in fact it is a piece of art.
That's Assistant Professor Abena Owusu-Bempah from LSE. Chichi, what do the police and Crown Prosecution Service say?
Well, the police say some of the tracks that they found posted on sites like YouTube are being used to taunt rival gangs, and then that violence spills out onto British streets. So they've asked sites like YouTube to take down those videos they claim are inciting or encouraging violence. So since around 2016, London's Metropolitan Police Service has asked for nearly 579 videos to be removed from social media sites, describing them as potentially harmful. Detective Inspector Kieran McAuliffe from London's Metropolitan Police says that they are not censoring music.
It's really caused a lot of heartache for families and society. So that's the sort of thing we're trying to say to people. It's fine, use it as an outlet. We're not here to suppress it, but just think about what you're saying.
The police view there, and thanks to Chichi Izundu for that reporting.
Yeah, 14 minutes to the hour. Quick reminder of the headlines. US Democrats say they're pressing ahead with their plan to impeach Donald Trump for inciting last week's assault on Congress. And Italy's biggest Mafia trial, as we were hearing just a few minutes ago on this programme, the biggest trial in 3 decades, is due to begin in the southern region of Calabria. James Gregg's here with the sport.
And a little quick-fire Premier League roundup then now. We'll start with Manchester United, who are 3 points clear at the top of the Premier League, thanks to this man.
Pogba with a shot, and he's found the net on the volley, on the edge of the area. 20 minutes to play. It's Burnley 0, Manchester United 1.
And that's how it stayed, not since Sir Alex Ferguson's final title-winning season of the club led the way in January. United head to champions Liverpool on Sunday, and here's their boss, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer.
We're in a good place at the moment. The form is good, the confidence is good. Of course, we look forward to probably one of the 2 biggest challenges in European football. And they're the champions by right. They've been really good the last few years, so we're going to Anfield for a reality check.
Well, it could be a great game, that, on Sunday at Anfield. Elsewhere, cross-city rivals Everton are up to 4th. They're just a point behind Liverpool. That's after beating Wolves 2-1 at Molineux. It's Carlo Ancelotti's 6th away win of the season.
Without the crowd, of course, the away team has more advantage. We perform better away because at home we didn't have the support. We played with 2,000 supporters against Chelsea and Arsenal, and we won.
At the other end of the table, Sheffield United's wait for a league win is over. They beat Newcastle 1-0. After 18 games, it leaves Chris Wilder's side on 5 points, 9 points from safety.
I'm not going to get carried away. You know, it's been far too long from my team to get that win. But yeah, we're all delighted. I'm delighted for the players and the supporters. It's been a tough, obviously, and a long run.
Tonight, Spurs take on Fulham, Manchester City take on Brighton, and that is your Premier League update. Elsewhere, Atletico Madrid went 4 points clear. They've still got 2 games in hand over both Real Madrid and Barcelona. They beat Sevilla 2-0 last night. Now, Palmeiras held on to make the Copa Libertadores final 3-2 on aggregate. That's despite losing the second leg 2-0 against River Plate overnight. Santos face Boca in the other semi-final second leg tonight. It's 0-0 to begin with in that one. I'll bring in you the results of that on Newsday tomorrow. Elsewhere, NBA players will be required to spend at least the next 2 weeks in their homes, apart from leaving for games, practices and essential services. They'll probably be prohibited from leaving their hotels as well on the road. That's as part of a new range of coronavirus protocols. They've had to postpone 5 games this week in the NBA. Now, the new Formula 1 season will be starting a little later than planned after the first race, the Australian Grand Prix, was postponed because of COVID restrictions in the country. It means the season will be delayed by a week, so it's going to be Bahrain that hosts the opening race on March the 26th. And Egypt is busy preparing for the Men's World Handball Championship, which gets underway later. 32 national teams will be taking part. The event will be staged without spectators because of the coronavirus pandemic, of course. More sports news as ever at bbc.com/sports.
Thank you, James Gregg.
As part of our State of the Ocean series on our programme yesterday, we looked at the impact of climate change on the intensity of hurricanes in the Atlantic. Today, we turn our attention to the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on Earth. The BBC's Reagan Morris travelled on a whale-watching boat and sent this report from off the coast of California.
I heard a distant humpback.
You can tell all the different whales just from the sound?
I know humpback. I speak whale.
Whale researcher Elisa Schulman-Janiger uses her phone to listen to the live feed of an underwater microphone as we motor out onto the Pacific Ocean.
Good afternoon. Welcome aboard the Triumphant.
We're on a tourist cruise looking for whales. Many research trips are grounded due to coronavirus.
There's a lot more opportunity right now to do work listening to the whales because of those grounded cruise ships, for example, and not as many planes flying. The water's not as noisy. The environment for whales isn't as noisy. So we believe it's easier for them to communicate, perhaps to find mates, perhaps to hunt their food.
That's so interesting. That's a benefit of coronavirus.
That's about the only benefit I could think of.
What can the health of the whale and the experiences of whales tell us about the health of the Pacific Ocean?
Well, whales are indicator species, for example, gray whales. They're known as the indicator or sentinel species for the Arctic. If the gray whales are doing really well, a lot of people will think, because this is something that we could see easily, we could take photos, we could count them, and we have a good feel for this coastal migrating species, makes us feel that that ecosystem is doing well. So gray whales are able to adapt to some changing conditions. So if a gray whale is not doing well, you know there's some massive change that's happening that's really making them have to struggle.
And gray whales are struggling. Hundreds have washed up along the west coast from Mexico to the Arctic over the last 2 years. Some are skinny, but not all of them, and scientists aren't clear why the die-off is happening.
I know it's too soon to know completely what is going wrong or what went wrong, but the die-off was less significant in 2020 than 2019, so that's a positive indicator?
Yeah, it is, with a caveat. We didn't see as many for gray whales. It's called an unusual mortality event, which did happen in 1999 and 2000. We lost about 1/3, we think, of all the gray whales there are in those 2 years. This is another UME, or unusual mortality event, and this may very likely be our third season. We don't know yet, since it's too early in the season. We're just starting to see gray whales migrate.
We've been out here about an hour or so far, and all I've seen are balloons, abandoned party balloons.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh!
We finally found some animals.
I see dolphins here.
There's a lot of room for optimism, but there is a lot of room for concern, because people need to understand that we have a huge impact on them, and that we do share our planet with them, and we need to think in what we do in terms of not just the here and now, but of the future. We can't put out nets and grab all the food we want when we could be entangling whales, and then those whales will not be here anymore. So education, conservation, research, and all that working together with citizen scientists coming up the ranks and eyes on the water. The technology and advancements don't only have to be something that's going to be negative impact. It could be something that's actually positive, but we need to have that interest, we need to have that education, and everybody needs to do their job, like use reusable bags and cigarette butts. Don't leave them out. There's lots of things that an individual can do, and teach the future generations too how important that is, so we don't end up with a big pile of trash. Plastic everywhere. We have to do something about that. 100 years ago, that wasn't a problem.
That's the whale researcher Elisa Schulman-Janneke, ending that report by Reagan Morris.
6 minutes now, let's talk about trash of another type, trash talking. The US president has been banned by Twitter and Facebook. And in other news, Twitter and Facebook have been banned by the Ugandan president. Relations between social media and politics are fraught, as is the relationship between social media and freedom of speech. Talking about that ban on Donald Trump, which has been called for by his opponents for years, there have been some very interesting critics of it. Angela Merkel, the German leader, expressed alarm that Silicon Valley billionaires were deciding basically who gets heard. The Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, asked, why do you ban Trump and you don't ban autocrats like Vladimir Putin? And Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil is moving to rival platform Telegram because Twitter is censoring his best buddy. Well, one group monitoring social media around the world is the Middle East Media and Research Institute. One of their founders is Ambassador Alberto Fernandez. He's the vice president of Memory. I've been talking to him about this issue, which is going to be a big talking point. Who ends up making the decision to get banned or not?
I remember when I worked in the U.S. government with the rise of ISIS, there was a concern in the U.S. government about pressing social media companies. It sounds crazy now. Pressing social media company too much in 2014 to take stuff off because it would empower or help the discourse of the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians. And of course, Twitter played a role in the rise of this ISIS phenomenon that we saw.
But that's fascinating. So what? So you're saying that there was an embarrassment in the government of not wanting to push the social media companies too far, bearing in mind the horror of what was circulating on their platforms then.
That's right. And only when ISIS in August of 2014 began beheading Westerners and putting those clips and those horrific images on, that's when the first takedowns by Twitter began of ISIS propagandists. In 2013, 2014, when the caliphates declared all of that, they are untouched in their presence there. It only becomes because of political pressure and popular pressure in the West that they're forced to change.
And what do you think, therefore, is the pressure that led them to take Donald Trump off Twitter? Because if it takes all that to make them act on beheading videos, did it take more or less to make them act on Donald Trump?
Well, I think social media companies, certainly in the United States, tend to lean left. That's not a surprise. It's not an insult. I think that's a reality. And so I think they are going to be extraordinarily conscious of kind of the discourse that exists on the progressive side or the left or the democratic side of the ledger. And certainly there was great unhappiness and by many people, not just Democrats, of what was seen as demagoguery by the president. And so they felt that they had to respond in accordance to the demands or the interests of their constituency, and obviously trying to be, responsible in some ways according to their own lights.
But what you say about the caliphate is fascinating, that there was a political embarrassment, you think, about not wanting to seem to be treading on the toes of the First Amendment and pushing social media too far before it became impossible to ignore.
There were two things. There was a kind of default, especially back then, a kind of default libertarian worldview in Silicon Valley that basically said freedom in the digital space is a good thing. It's a total good. And we don't want to limit that in any way. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. At the same time, the U.S. government didn't want to come down, didn't want to be seen as censoring social media companies because of that message that it sent. This is the same time that the U.S. government and others in the West were pressing for what? Internet freedom needed to be expanded in the world. We need to fight against regimes that want to limit and control internet freedom.
And I'm interested, to many countries outside the US particularly, isn't there a sense that the social media platforms are almost seen as state actors?
Well, there's that funny picture recently. Somebody had the head of Twitter meeting with the president of India and joking the two heads of state meeting each other. The idea that the leader of the world's largest democracy and the leader of this very, very important platform were somehow equals. Obviously, they're not, but we're in undiscovered territory here. We're in territory where you have companies wielding powers beyond the dreams of tyrants of ages past. And so we're all feeling our way into, how do we respond in this brave new world?
Ambassador Alberto Fernandez, Vice President of Memory. That's Newsday. James and Lawrence, thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
This is the BBC World Service. Now here's something to think about.
I'm David Edmonds, and in The Big Idea, I'll be examining new research on human reason and rationality.
Cultures that have been more integrated into market trading, they show a stronger concern for fairness.
I found some of the most fascinating ideas around and the people who thought them up.
The Big Idea, today at 10 GMT. And in half an hour, we join Ed Butler for Business Daily.
The US social media platform Parler is in the firing line this week, a magnet for far-right conspiracy theorists. According to its critics, it's gone from being a billion-dollar firm to a non-firm. Is that a good thing, though? Or is free speech being threatened?
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
upward trajectory of our second wave. So it is very worrying.
That's Barry Shube on Hard Talk after the news.
BBC News. Hello, I'm Jerry Smith. A number of senior figures in the US Republican Party have said they will support a second impeachment of President Trump. Democrats, who accuse Mr. Trump of inciting last week's violent assault on Congress, are likely to push for a vote later on Wednesday in the House of Representatives. John Sopel reports.
Last night, the third most senior Republican in the House of Representatives, Liz Cheney, and daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, issued an excoriating statement saying she'd vote to impeach. The President of the United States summoned this mob and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing, she said. Significantly, party leaders are not telling members which way to vote. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting that the leading Republican in the Senate, the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, has told associates that he believes Mr. Trump did commit impeachable offences.
YouTube has become the latest social media platform to frustrate President Trump's ability to speak directly to his supporters. Late on Tuesday, YouTube removed new content uploaded to his channel, saying it violated policies on inciting violence. No new videos or live streams can now be uploaded for at least 7 days. The convicted murderer, Lisa Montgomery, has been executed in prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. She became the first woman to be put to death since 1953. Here's Nomia Iqbal.
Protesters had gathered outside the jail, calling for Lisa Montgomery to be shown mercy. They agreed with lawyers for the 52-year-old who argued that she was a mentally ill victim of childhood abuse and should have remained behind bars for the rest of her life instead. Her lawyers criticised the Trump administration for allowing the killing to take place, saying the Constitution forbids the execution of a person who is unable to rationally understand it. But to the family and friends of Montgomery's victim, Bobby Joe Stinnett, she is a calculating killer. This is the 10th state execution in the last 6 months.
The trial of more than 350 Mafia suspects is due to begin in Calabria in southern Italy. Mark Lowen has the details.
Coordinated raids in Italy, Germany, Switzerland and Bulgaria more than a year ago led to the biggest ever strike against the 'Ndrangheta, the mafia based in the southern Italian region of Calabria, which has become Italy's most powerful organised crime group. More than 300 suspects face charges including murder, drug trafficking and money laundering in the largest anti-mafia trial since the 1980s. It focuses on one clan in the family-run 'Ndrangheta, which dominates Europe's cocaine trade and is estimated to boast at least 20,000 members worldwide.
World News from the BBC. Indonesia has begun a mass COVID-19 vaccination program using the Chinese-made Coronavac vaccine. But instead of vaccinating elderly people first, the authorities are prioritising frontline workers, followed by those aged 18 to 59. The health minister says the strategy is to target those who are likely to get the coronavirus and spread it. The number of people dying from COVID-19 in the United States has reached a new daily record. 4,470 people died in the 24 hours to Tuesday evening. A patent lodged by the Chinese technology company Huawei has been found to describe a system that could pick out members of the Uyghur ethnic minority from other pedestrians. The discovery is the latest indication of how China is using advanced surveillance technology in its campaign against the mainly Muslim Uyghur population. Huawei has previously claimed that none of its technologies are designed to identify ethnic groups. When the BBC raised the issue, the company said it would delete the reference and refile the patent. The United Nations World Food Programme is warning of a looming humanitarian crisis in southern Madagascar. It's caused by 3 consecutive years of drought and a recession triggered by the coronavirus pandemic. Here's Richard Hamilton.
The WFP says the droughts, coupled with the economic impact of coronavirus, will leave a third of the population in southern Madagascar struggling to put food on the table. It says that with malnutrition rates continuing to spiral, families are resorting to eating tamarind fruit mixed with clay to survive. The agency is appealing for $35 million in funding. A recent assessment by the WFP in one town
found that 3 out of 4 children were absent from school, mostly to help their parents forage for food.
And that's the BBC News.
Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today is a key player in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic in one of the countries worst affected by the second wave of the virus. Barry Shube is a veteran and eminent South African virologist who founded his country's Institute for Communicable Diseases and is currently chair of the government's Advisory Committee on COVID vaccines. South Africa is experiencing an alarming surge in infections and deaths linked to the emergence of a highly transmissible new strain of the coronavirus. The government imposed a second lockdown before Christmas, but critics say it's too little, too late, and they accuse officials of bungling the rollout of a vaccination program which could begin to turn the tide of the pandemic. Right now, South Africa is one of the most important front lines in the COVID crisis. Does the Pretoria government have a strategy that will avert a public health disaster? Well, Barry Shube joins me now on the line from Johannesburg. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you.
It's good to have you on the show. How bleak is the COVID picture in your country, South Africa, right now?
It is bleak. We are well into our second wave, which is really manifesting quite a bit more seriously than our first wave. We're averaging about 18 to 20,000 new cases per day, as against the highest peak that we had in our first wave of about 14,000. So that gives you some idea that we really are on a steep upward trajectory of our second wave. So it is very worrying, and we're just worrying it's going to move up to our province of Gauteng, where Johannesburg is situated, and it's probably going to expand there quite considerably. So it is a worry.
Would it be fair to say, in the sort of the language we use about this pandemic, that right now it is, in South Africa, out of control?
Well, we try to control it. At the moment, of course, we don't have a vaccine control, but we do have the other infection prevention controls, and that could, in other words, human behavioral controls, could, to some extent, to a significant extent, control it. So is it out of control? Well, it certainly is expanding. Can it be controlled? It can be ameliorated, yes.
How much of this is directly linked to the fact that you in South Africa have a new strain of coronavirus? I've variously seen it described as variant 501, mutation E484K. Now, I'm no expert, but whatever you call it, it is clearly highly transmissible, not necessarily in itself more dangerous to any individual that's got it, but it is much more transmissible. And is that the reason why South Africa right now is in the middle of this crisis?
Stephen, to answer, I think it's a combination of factors. I think it's human behavior, because certainly human behavior triggered the second wave. We had a massive super spreading event in the country. Of students going on a musical festival. That triggered it. But certainly the variant, which, as you say, is considerably more infectious, is also contributing to it. I think it's a combination of both. I think one of the big problems is that now in our second wave, people are tired of all these infection prevention measures. In the first wave, people were very much more compliant because it was an unknown. There was a lot more anxiety. So now with the second wave, unfortunately, people are not not significantly even, sticking to what they should be sticking. So I think that to a large extent is driving it. And then, of course, the variant is also helping it along.
President Ramaphosa recently said, "We have let our guard down." Now, in late December, he imposed a new set of national restrictions, which some are calling a de facto lockdown. It's an odd one, because in some ways it's very draconian. You have a nighttime curfew, which lasts, I believe, from 9 in the evening till 6 the following morning, which very few other countries actually have a full-on curfew. But then in other ways, it's not draconian at all, because up until early evening, you can still get a meal in a restaurant, you can meet with friends indoors, you can still gather in outside venues. Has South Africa got this wrong?
No, I don't think so. I think the problem is really balancing, keeping the economy going, because, as you probably know, our economy is not in great shape, to put it mildly. And to kind of impose restrictions which would affect the economy, I think would be very, very harmful to the country. So the government was really faced with a problem.
Hang on. Let's stop you just right there. Are you saying it's more important to keep the restaurant industry alive than it is to keep thousands of people alive who are going to die of COVID-19 because they're going to catch it in restaurants in the mid-afternoon and early evening?
That's a very trick question, Stephen. No, I think you had to do a calculation, really. How many people would get infected in the restaurant? I don't think there'd be a significant number. I think it's the major gatherings, and this has been shown scientifically. A very recent publication has shown this. It's the gatherings, the kind of festival-type gatherings. Restaurants do have strict rules about wearing a mask coming into the restaurant, taking a mask off while you're eating, obviously, but avoiding the mixing. The waiters wear masks, there's hand sanitizer, etc. So those precautions are in place to try and limit the spread. But on the other hand, the problem is, of course, in our country, that if you have too draconian measures, lockdown measures, for example, it does affect other health issues. Because if there is a shutdown, if people stay at home, for example, and it has been shown quite clearly in numbers that other health things, maintenance of HIV therapy, for example, and TB therapy, antenatal, all those things do suffer. So one has to kind of balance what the restrictions, the cost of the restrictions, economic and health costs, versus what we're saving from a public health point of view in terms of COVID spread. And I think that juggling act is a fine act. It is based on science. It's not. Very often it does sound to some extent contradictory, and maybe to some extent has been lampooned. But I think that it has been really more or less worked out. Keep the economy okay, keep the other health sector maintenance therapy okay, at the same time weigh it up to what you're going to prevent in terms of COVID. So the curfew, for example, has a very limited limited damage to the economy, but it does limit, for example, alcohol drinking. There's alcohol is a ban as well. Trauma, which can overload the hospital system, etc., etc.
But in brief, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, is clearly on the cusp of extending the lockdown or restrictions for at least another month. But there's a big question mark about whether he's going to make them tougher. As your country's leading virologist, do you think they should be tougher right now?
I think that we are really in a very kind of precarious position with COVID at the moment. It's expanding rapidly, as I mentioned earlier. And I think certain restrictions do need to be tightened. Some need to be prolonged. But I don't think, personally, as a virologist, that we need to go into a hard lockdown. I think a hard lockdown, in other words, what we had called our lockdown 5, is going to be too damaging to the other things, the economy and the other health issues.
Explain something that really puzzles me. Why is it that across the continent of Africa, most countries are giving us readouts, official stats on coronavirus, which suggest that they have been hit much less hard than, for example, the United States and most of Western Europe, and yet the most prosperous country in the entire continent, the country with the best healthcare infrastructure and the most modern economy, the most sophisticated economy in Africa, is the country where coronavirus has impacted hardest. In many ways, it's counterintuitive. What is it that has led South Africa to a European-style experience with coronavirus when the rest of Africa, thank God, has appeared to have escaped more lightly?
I think it's a combination of factors, like everything else is a combination of factors. For one thing, it's a very highly urbanized country. It's an industrialized country. I think that goes with the spread of coronavirus, because that facilitates people coming together in congregate environments, and that facilitates the spread of virus. And that's why it's spread, for example, in Europe much more so than South Africa, in fact, particularly in your country, United Kingdom, much more so than in South Africa, because that kind of industrialized environment does promote the spread of the virus. And South Africa is obviously a much more industrialized country than many of our neighboring countries. That's the one factor. The second factor is urbanization. Many of these countries are largely rural, and we know that rural environments where people are a lot more spread out in an outdoor environment probably also decreases the spread of the virus. Many of the countries are, of course, tropical countries, a lot of sunlight, a lot of outdoors and so on. That probably also decreases the spread of the virus. And probably also to a very significant extent is the degree of reporting. I think there is a significant amount of underreporting of cases, underreporting of mortality in the countries to the north of us. We have a pretty good reporting system. Not ideal, I agree, but certainly pretty good and certainly much better than our neighbouring countries.
What you also have is deep inequalities in South Africa. I read one extraordinary statistic in one of the cities hit hardest by COVID, Port Elizabeth. There were recently 59 people on ventilators in hospitals. 57 of those 59 were in expensive private hospitals, only 2 in public hospitals. If you are poor in South Africa today and you get COVID, your chances of being hit very badly and of dying are way higher, are they not?
You're right, you're right. That is one of the problems, one of the things that we do have to kind of improve on. I think something like the Eastern Cape, where Port Elizabeth that you mentioned is a particularly deprived part of the country. I don't think that ratio would apply as much, for example, in Johannesburg or in Cape Town or in Durban. I can't give you, you might have it, but I don't think that ratio is quite as, you unfortunately picked the kind of worst example, but you're absolutely correct. That there is that equality needs to be addressed as quickly as possible.
Let's get to the crucial question of vaccines and rolling out the vaccines, which is very much your domain, both as a virologist, but also as the guy who is chairing the advisory committee, telling the government how to handle its vaccine strategy. There are many critics in your country who think that the government has already bungled this. You only have, as I understand it, 1 million vials of vaccine that are due to be in South Africa through the course of this month, and an extra 500,000 coming in February. For a country with a population of some 60 million plus, this is disastrous.
No, I think disastrous is an exaggeration, with all due respect. No, that 1 million coming at the end of this month, 500,000 coming at the end of next month, are earmarked for the highest priority for the healthcare workers. There is extensive bilateral negotiations going on with various manufacturers to have a vaccine rollout, and the Department of Health, or the Minister of Health, is confident that we will be able to immunize the entire, 2/3 of the population, which is the earmark, which is the aim, which we need to get to for getting herd immunity. We need to immunize 67%, 2/3 of the population, to get to herd immunity. That's about 40 million of the adult population. And he's pretty confident we're going to get to that stage. By the end of the
hang on, Professor Shub. You're talking about immunizing 40 million people to get some sort of collective immunity. That's 80 million doses of vaccine, because everybody needs 2 doses. You're currently telling me that you've only got on order 1.5 million doses, and you're telling me this isn't disastrous? It sounds terrible, and it's not just me. I just noticed just a few days ago, a group of 9 of South Africa's most eminent scientists slammed the vaccine situation, saying it beggars belief that South Africa, against all reasonable expectation, finds itself in the group of poorest, most vulnerable countries dependent on the international COVAX program for access to vaccine. And yet we in South Africa are not a poor country.
That is unfortunate. I don't want to use too strong a term. I'm not sure I'd agree with the term eminent scientists. I don't think their science is that eminent. And I don't think I think they're a little bit sparing with the truth as well.
Forgive me, but what is wrong with their analysis when they say South Africa is very much a middle-income country? It's got massive resources, and yet it is as vulnerable right now to the lack of supply of vaccine as some of the poorest countries on earth.
I can explain if you'd let me explain. I think the 1.5 million is what is on its way. There is vaccine which is, unfortunately, there are non-disclosure agreements which are signed, which I can't reveal on air, which will assure the country of vaccine for the entire year. That is negotiations which is going on, which is taking place. The minister has in fact mentioned that, but unfortunately our eminent colleagues ignore that. And they might have another agenda which has kind of caused them to kind of go on a rampage, literally a rampage to criticize the. You know, it's interesting if you look at the COVID epidemic. It has three consequences: conspiracy theories, miracle drugs such as chloroquine, ivermectin, and the vaccine, and also the blame game. And unfortunately, the blame game, is taken up by these scientists, which is very unfortunate. I'll tell you why it's unfortunate, because it's undermining trust. It's undermining trust, and the government or authorities give out the non-palatable infection control procedures like wearing masks, physical distancing, no social. And of the public, it's undermining that trust of these precautions which are going out. I've mentioned that in an article.
Well, I know. You know what? I read your article with great care. And when you say other people are playing the blame game, it seems to me you're playing the blame game too. First of all, you're blaming people who ran certain trials in your country, trials of vaccines, because you say those people should have made sure when they agreed to do the trial work that they got guaranteed supplies of the vaccines after the trial. So you're blaming other people, not yourself, for that. And you're also blaming the rich countries of the world. You say that they've been indulging in what you call, quote, a vaccine grab, hoovering up most of the available vaccine coming out of the world's pharmaceutical companies. So on both counts, you're the blame gamer.
No, I can tell you who I am blaming? I'm blaming the system. I'm blaming the system because I think vaccines should be treated not as other commodities. Vaccines need to be taken out of the market economy because vaccines are different to other commodities. And I think that's the crux of the problem. Because when profit drives the purchase of vaccines, this is the unfortunate, this is the casualties. And I think it's unfortunate because it's not only a social responsibility, it's a responsibility when you have a pandemic that the entire world, low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries, get an equitable access to vaccines. What has happened, and you can't deny it, Stephen, that there are 13% of the world's population have pre-bought 51% of the production of vaccines.
You mean 13% of the world's the richest nations of the world have hoovered up a lot of the vaccine that is available? That's what you're saying?
Exactly that. And the problem is it's not only social responsibility, it's actually sensibility, because pandemics don't recognize borders. Pandemics spread across borders. And if you have a country or a region where a virus is circulating, even if your country is protected by vaccines, it can never be protected 100%. That virus will find itself into those high-income countries. That's the one problem. The other problem, the second problem, is a virological problem. If the virus is circulating in one part of the world, that's when it's going to pick up these mutations, which is going to threaten the rest of the world.
I totally understand the point you're making, the interconnectedness of it all and the equitable nature of the system you want to see. But I just come back to this one point. You are the guy who is the chief advisor to your government on vaccines. Yours is not a poor government. Was it not your national duty as a South African to tell the government that they should be buying up substantial amounts of vaccine months and months ago when the UK government was doing it, the US government was doing it? You in South Africa could have afforded to do it too, but you chose not to. And that's why these eminent or not scientists and others have accused you of being asleep at the wheel.
No, but Stephen, the reason for that is that, let me correct you, we're not a wealthy country. We're a middle-income country which has got severe economic woes. We were faced, it's very easy to go now and retrospectively look at the factors, but we were faced at the time with putting down 2.4 billion rand, South African rand, which is a substantial amount of money, on deposit, non-refundable deposit, during vaccine trials for vaccines which at that stage we didn't know whether they're going to work or not. The high-income countries could afford to do that, because if the vaccine didn't pan out or weren't suitable for their registration authorities, those deposits would not affect the economies in the same way as it did. Look, I don't answer for the Department of Health. Our advisory did recommend, and this is published on our on the Department of Health website, to do bilateral negotiations. For whatever reason, the Treasury or the Department or the government could not afford a 2.4 billion rand deposit at risk.
Right. So it was about very clear. It was about money, and I get that message loud and clear. The UK, which as you pointed out has a bigger COVID crisis than South Africa right now, the UK has decided that to ensure the maximum collective safety of the community, they're going to roll out the vaccine by prioritizing first doses and not giving the second dose after 3 weeks, but using more of the available doses for first dose use and extending the period until the second dose as long as 12 weeks. Will South Africa do that as well to offer protection to as many people as possible as quickly as possible?
We may do that. It does come, it's got pros and it's got cons. The disadvantage is that, of course, you've got a 12-week period of vulnerability. Not 12-week, maybe a 10-week period of vulnerability. So we need to evaluate how the vaccine is going to roll out. Is that feasible? It would be very advantageous. As you mentioned, it is being rolled out in the United Kingdom. So we may well do that. But I think we have to look at the population, how the vaccine is reaching out to particular parts of the population, and make that evaluation at a later stage.
All right, and a final question which people around the world will really want a clear answer to. In your view, is the South African mutation variant of the COVID-19 vaccine going to be more resistant to the vaccines that we currently have or not? In basic terms, should we be deeply worried about the South African variation?
I was waiting for that question. Stephen, the answer is that this is intense research done back in South Africa and worldwide, looking at our variant, at the Brazilian variant. In other words, the variants which got additional mutations to the United Kingdom variant. At this stage, it's looking good, but I must say it's preliminary. Preliminary evidence seems to point to that the vaccine will be effective, but it is still being intensively researched. Hopefully, it still will be effective.
So truly, you don't know. You're just you're being optimistic with me, but you don't know yet whether your variant of COVID-19 might be much more resistant to the international vaccines.
We've got indications that it will not be resistant, but that the jury is still out because the research has not been completed.
Barry Shub, we have to leave it there, but I thank you so very much for joining me on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thanks for having me. I hope my answers were all right.
Dark days have come for us all. And when things are bleak, it's hard to stand tall.
I'm feeling so sad. I don't know what to do.
But whenever hard times come to call,
the water on my face and in my shoes helps me remember that this is real, that this is no dream.
Just know that soon brighter days will be here.
You know what? No one can tell me I'm not allowed to talk about this.
Days of hope.
Gentlemen, we have arrived in the promised land.
And days of delight.
It was just pure happiness.
And days when everything just seems right.
You have conducted probably one of the greatest interviews I've ever had.
Let a BBC World Service podcast take you somewhere else.
I feel so emotional.
Search for BBC World Service wherever you get your podcasts.
Doesn't that look beautiful, you guys?
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Ed Butler. Today we're going to be looking at the silencing of a president. After last week's violence in Washington, Donald Trump has been taken off virtually all social media, and the platform Parler has been shut down. Is this to protect us from hate speech, though, Or is it the silencing of dissent by powerful tech firms? That's Business Daily in a couple of minutes.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Several senior Republicans have said they will support a second impeachment of President Trump a week before his term ends. Democrats intend to push for a vote later today in the House of Representatives. The move became almost certain after the Vice President, Mike Pence, said he was not prepared to use his powers to replace Mr. Trump using the 25th Amendment. YouTube has become the latest social media platform to frustrate President Trump's ability to speak directly to his supporters. Late on Tuesday, YouTube removed new content uploaded to his channel, saying it violated policies of inciting violence. The convicted murderer Lisa Montgomery has been executed in prison in Indiana, becoming the first woman to be put to death by the U.S. federal justice system since 1953. She was described by doctors as too mentally incompetent to be executed. Lisa Montgomery had been convicted of kidnapping and strangling Bobby Jo Stinnett, then 8 months pregnant, and cutting Stinnett's baby from the womb. The child survived. Indonesia has begun a mass COVID vaccination program using the Chinese-made CoronaVac vaccine. The health authorities are prioritising frontline workers, followed by those aged 18 to 59, those most at risk of contracting the disease. The UN and the government in the Central African Republic say rebels have carried out 2 attacks near the capital Bangui. Reports said one of the assaults targeted a checkpoint manned by government troops and Russian mercenaries. Ministers say the attackers were pushed back, but a UN spokesman has been quoted as describing the fighting as ongoing. And the trial of more than 350 Mafia suspects starts today in Calabria in southern Italy. And that's the BBC News.
Hello there, I'm Ed Butler, and welcome to Business Daily from the BBC World Service. Today, can America's politicians heal the divisive wounds of online hatred?
We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and we've got to stop the divisive rhetoric. If we're going to expect Democrats to stop with the division, then we've got to initiate it on our side as well.
We're looking at the silencing of a US president in today's programme, on social media at least. Are Facebook and the other platforms right to ban him? Or is deeper surgery required?
We have a choice. We can try to fix Facebook, or we can try to fix the internet. I think that if we try to fix Facebook, we will be sorely disappointed. But if we try to fix the internet, we might save our civilization.
That's all to come on Business Daily from the BBC. The violence that attended the storming of Congress last week, it has been all over the media and indeed social media in recent days, and this week the corporate fallout has really hit us. Firstly, in terms of the social media platforms, Parler was set up 2 years ago as a potential rival to Twitter and Facebook, platforms that had increasingly begun at least to consider curbing some of the extreme content on their sites. Parler, though, not so much it seems, at least according to its critics, and increasingly popular with the conservative fringe, it was accused of fomenting racist, xenophobic and other types of hate speech. For example, promoting the argument that the recent presidential election was rigged. Over the weekend, the platform suddenly went dark. Google and Apple, which between them run iOS and Android, the software deployed on the vast majority of mobile phones used by Americans, delisted the company. Amazon's web hosting service also cut it off. The BBC's North America business reporter Michelle Fleury told me how it all happened.
With Parler, there was a sense that its content wasn't being moderated very effectively compared to, say, some of the other sites. And certainly in the wake of the riots last week, you saw Apple was the first company to send out a notice saying, look, you need to step up your game on this front because there is too much calls towards violence on the platform. We are concerned about this, so get back to us. Google then, last Friday, took the step of going even further and said you can no longer download Parler from our App Store. That put pressure on Apple. It also put pressure on Amazon, and the company came forward and said, right, we're not comfortable with your approach and with your lack of moderation, so we're going to boot you off our servers and essentially render you homeless.
Yeah, the CEO of Parler, John Matzer, spoke to the US Fox News channel earlier this week. He described this as a brazen attack on free speech by the tech giants. Now, basically, he's saying he's going to sue Amazon, among other things, isn't he, for being delisted, accusing Amazon of antitrust violations, breach of contract. The tech firms, though, are standing pretty robustly to their position. They seem to think that they have public opinion on their side.
Well, and this is what's going to be fascinating moving forward is right now there is a kind of groundswell of public support. We've seen Twitter and Facebook and Instagram deplatform the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Going forward, though, it raises challenges for these companies, which are, it's worth pointing out, able to do this because they're private companies. They set their own terms and conditions. But, you know, going forward, how do they apply this same approach to other political leaders, dictators around the world? How do they apply this to other individuals around the world? It opens a can of worms, which I think we don't fully understand yet.
The BBC's Michelle Fleury. Well, in the face of a backlash from conservative commentators, Amazon have warned staff about threats to their safety this week after shutting down Parler. Employees were told to be vigilant in case of a backlash. Facebook staff were told not to wear company clothing in public following its ban of the US president's account. But despite that, the Facebook CEO, Sheryl Sandberg, told Reuters she had no regrets about what she'd done.
We have clearly established principles that say you cannot call for violence in this moment. In this moment, the risk to our democracy was too big that we felt we had to take the unprecedented step of what is an indefinite ban. And I'm glad we did.
Well, she's glad, and so, the polls suggest, are the majority of Americans for now, but there will be political costs. Nancy Mace is a newly elected Republican representative in Congress from the state of South Carolina.
They're a private company, and so it was their choice to do that. But at the same time, they're not applying that standard of business across the board because you have the Chinese Communist government, invoking genocide against the Uyghurs. You have Ayatollahs, or the supreme leader of Iran, encouraging violence against America and its citizens. And so if that's going to be the standard, then these social media companies should be applying that standard equally across the board. There's no doubt about it. And it's inconsistent, it's a hypocrisy, and it's un-American.
Sure. Consistency, I guess, when it comes to free speech is a complicated one. But when we are also dealing with perhaps an imminent threat to the stability of the nation, you have condemned the president yourself, haven't you, for the words that he said?
I have condemned the president, and I have condemned the president in the strongest words possible. I've also condemned my colleagues who ginned up the rhetoric leading to this violence. And my colleagues, some of them do not want to take responsibility for it. And I find it abhorrent because some people, even within my own party, are in complete denial about what happened last Wednesday. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And we've got to stop the divisive rhetoric. If we're going to expect Democrats to stop with the division, then we've got to initiate it on our side as well. We've got to be willing to say enough is enough. We're going to recognize that we have a problem in this country. We're going to take responsibility for it, and we're going to work to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. That is the only way that we can earn back the trust of the American people, because until then, we've lost all the ground that we gained over the last 4 years. And if you want to talk about election integrity, we've lost all of our ability to talk about the things, investigate the things that are important to the American people because of what happened on Wednesday, because of the rhetoric turned to violence.
If you're talking about dialing down the rhetoric, dialing down the language of division, don't you have to start with the social media platforms that are peddling it, and indeed the people, the main speakers in the US, who are putting that stuff out there?
Right. And it needs to happen across the board. You can't have communist dictators invoking genocide and violence and terrorism, far worse language than our president has used. It's got to be applied equally because there is violence all around the world. And so if Jack at Twitter is going to do that to the president, then he needs to apply it to everybody else as well.
What do you suggest we should do about the social media platforms, whether it's Parler, Twitter, Facebook, whoever?
Yeah, well, I'm about a week into office, and I'm just trying to get through this 25th Amendment vote and impeachment vote and reconcile what happened last week. It's been an emotional, both mentally, physically, and emotional week for all of us, and want to look at what can be done to ensure that people's safety will come first. I think there are many ways to go about doing that.
Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Well, while the political classes are ranting at each other this week, what do more analytical heads say? Cory Doctorow is certainly no conservative himself. He's a blogger, an author and an activist in favour of liberalising copyright laws. I asked him what he made of the platform's argument against Parler that it had lacked the software filters necessary to moderate hate speech.
I think that, it's perfectly legitimate for these firms to say, we kick Parler off because we don't like it. It's odious. It was created to foment violence and racism. We don't stand for that. We've kicked them off. But to argue that the problem with Parler is that they didn't have a piece of software that could distinguish hate speech from not hate speech is really a nonsense. We don't have in computer science the tool that can distinguish between someone complaining about being called a racist slur and someone using the racist slur. So let's not pretend that the reason that there's hate speech on platforms is that they just can't be bothered to nerd hard enough to automatically detect and remove hate speech. Content moderation is a hard problem, and it particularly gets hard at scale. But to say, we're going to just entrust it to software and not care about all the dolphins that'll catch in the tuna net is grossly irresponsible.
Yeah, but because moderation is so hard, because moderation is so expensive, it's going to take massive companies who can afford the tens of thousands of people they need, the boots on the ground, to be actually surveying what's being said on their platforms.
Well, that's certainly Facebook's argument. Facebook repeatedly has told us and reminded us that their moderation team exceeds Twitter's total headcount, and they are standing ready and prepared to block all the objectionable speech if we would only just tell them what speech was objectionable. Facebook has been terrible at moderating bad speech. They will continue to be terrible at moderating bad speech. That much is very clear. What they will do, if they embrace this standard, is clear the field of potential competitors. The monopolist's first preference is always to be not regulated at all, but a close second is to be regulated in a way that only a monopolist can comply with, so that when the dust settles, only the monopolist remains. The problem with Facebook's moderation is not a lack of investment. It's Facebook's decision to grow to the scale that it grew to, and to prevent the interoperability that would allow people to leave Facebook and stay in touch with their friends, so that you have to choose between staying in touch with your friends or going to a rival that might have better moderation policies.
So, sorry, the scale is the function of what gave us this toxic conspiracy theory peddling and hate speech?
You couldn't, at Facebook scale, do any kind of meaningful moderation that would completely eliminate it, although they could obviously do a better job. If you wanted to have a non-toxic environment, you would probably have to have a smaller scale. So we have a choice. We can try to fix Facebook, or we can try to fix the internet. I think that if we try to fix Facebook, we will be sorely disappointed. But if we try to fix the internet, we might save our civilization.
Breaking up Facebook, or a couple of Facebooks, into 5 or 6 different Facebooks, how does that reduce the amount of hate speech?
Well, it would certainly reduce the salience of hate speech, and it would allow users who didn't like the hate speech policies of the platform to continue to talk to their friends without being subjected to it. So getting people to stop saying bad things and thinking bad things that makes them so angry that they are prey for grifters and fascists who want to tell them fairy tales about other oppressed people being the cause of their misery.
Sure, but if the allegation is there's money to be made in grifters and fascists, and if a new Facebook was created, they'd perhaps cash in the same way.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have the economies of scale that they have now.
So antitrust is a key tool, is the prime tool to clean up this problem?
I would say that pro-competition is the prime tool. The dominant tech platforms have found ways to make it a literal felony to compete with them through things like the copyright directive, software patents, enforceable terms of service, and so on. And they've kicked the ladder away so that no one can do unto them what they did unto others.
Do you think that this is a watershed moment in that it will galvanize both sides in the argument to reconsider the way that we relate to these social platforms?
This has accelerated the flywheel of interest in competition. For the longest time, the kind of Thatcherite wing of the economics world said that there was really nothing wrong with a monopoly, and that monopolies should only be enforced against if you could show that they were conspiring to raise prices, and that in every other instance it was fine. And as the